We all know the image, a sweeping ballroom, the soft glow of chandeliers, and women gliding like swans in satin lace and impossibly wide hoop skirts. There's perfume in the air, champagne in hand, and the slow waltz of empire and etiquette spinning into the night. But here's what no one ever talks about. How seriously did they pee? Because when you're laced into a corset so tight, your ribs have to make small talk, and you're dragging around a small steel birdcage under your skirt. The logistics of going to the bathroom don't exactly scream graceful. And yet, these women did it. Repeatedly, in public, during events, without sparking scandal or worse, ruining the rug. Let's get this out of the way early. Victorian women didn't wear underwear the way we think of it. Drawers, as they were called, were often split down the middle. Yes, split because you physically couldn't get them off without a team of maids, a crowbar, and a prayer. They often just squatted over chamber pots at parties, and they carried urinettes, which were dainty, ladylike pee vessels they tucked under skirts like secrets. Today we're lifting the velvet curtain on Victorian fashion's dirtiest little secrets. We're talking bathroom emergencies in brocade, crinolines in close quarters, and a world where looking beautiful meant sacrificing not just comfort, but basic bodily dignity. Welcome to the absurd, ingenious, and absolutely true story of how Victorian women relieved themselves while looking like they had absolutely no bodily functions whatsoever. Let's start with the elephant in the ballroom, the hoop skirt, or more specifically, the Great Hoop Skirt Mystery. Victorian fashion in the mid-1800s was, to put it mildly, architectural. The hoop skirt or crinoline wasn't just a fashion statement, it was an engineering feat. Think steel or whalebone hoops stitched into stiff fabric, creating a bell shape so wide you could knock over a side table just by turning around too fast. But here's the problem, when you're essentially wearing a portable birdcage around your waist, how do you squat over a chamber pot? Let's start with the fact that most Victorian homes, yes, even wealthy ones, didn't have indoor plumbing until the late 19th century. Your options were chamber pots, outdoor privies, or if you were really lucky, a water closet tucked in some drafty hallway. That's assuming you weren't at the theater or in a carriage or navigating a dinner party with 15 layers of petticoats. Now imagine this. You're wearing a corset so tight you can't bend at the waist, stockings held up by garters, multiple petticoats for modesty, and on top of all that, a hoop skirt so wide it could eclipse a small planet. And now nature calls. But wait, it gets weirder. Underneath all those layers, often nothing, or rather split drawers. These were open crotch undergarments that allowed a woman to relieve herself without removing a single layer. Practical? Incredibly. Dignified? Depends on how close the chamber pot was to the piano. You don't learn this in school, but fashion manuals and etiquette guides from the era advised women to simply perch over a pot and let the crinoline fall around them like a privacy curtain. Some even designed hoop skirts that could fold upwards or sideways. Yes, like a hoop skirt origami to make crouching easier. Picture this, a well-dressed lady in the drawing room politely excusing herself, stepping behind a modesty screen, and swoosh hoisting her skirts while crouching over a ceramic bowl with brass handles, all while her corset digs into her ribs and the music carries on downstairs. And mind you, this was considered normal. Now imagine you're not in the comfort of your parlor, but at a lavish ball. Welcome to Potty Panic at the Victorian Ball. The music swells, the punch flows, the gossip is hot, and the dancing is hotter. But here's the unspoken reality. Women were expected to stand, sit, dance, and socialize in heavy binding garments for hours, sometimes upwards of 6 to 8 hours with no formal bathroom breaks, no designated restrooms, and no sympathy from anyone if things got urgent. Enter the bourdaloue. It sounds like a French pastry, but nope, it was essentially a stylish little urinal for women, shaped like a small gravy boat, often made of fine porcelain or silver, sometimes even with a discreet handle. The bourdaloue was designed to be slipped under the skirts for a quick seated urination. Ladies could perch on the edge of a chair or even a carriage seat and relieve themselves, often with the assistance of a maid. Yes, you heard that right. They peed into dainty porcelain vessels while sitting in chairs. And sometimes at the ball itself, the ballroom chamber pot was a thing. Some larger venues designated small retiring rooms with chamber pots behind curtains. In more private or daring cases, wealthy women had personal attendants help them navigate a discreet wee behind a screen, or even in a side room during the festivities. These attendants, by the way, had to be absolute pros at helping their mistress hover, pour, and powder their noses without so much as a splash on the silk. And remember, they're doing this in corsets that make breathing optional. But what about accidents? Surely not everyone made it in time. Oh, there were accidents. While direct documentation is rare, because who wants that in their memoir? Diary entries and letters hint at unfortunate dampness, ruined underlayers, and very carefully worded apologies for cutting the evening short. Some women, in anticipation of long evenings with limited access to chamber pots, simply didn't drink water all day. Others wore absorbent padding, or even early versions of what we might recognize today as sanitary towels, but made of cloth, wool, or moss. Yes, moss. Peat moss was absorbent, biodegradable, and already used for menstrual protection in some areas. Because let's not forget, for all their elegance, these women were living in bodies. Sweating, swelling, urinating bodies. And they were expected to pretend that wasn't happening, even as their garments turned every bathroom trip into a Cirque du Soleil act. And now, it's time to talk about the full body trap known as the corset. Welcome to Corsets, Crinolines, and Catastrophes. The corset is maybe the most misunderstood fashion item in history. It wasn't necessarily torture, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. A tightly laced corset compressed the waist, lifted the bust, improved posture, and significantly reduced mobility. A woman couldn't bend at the waist. Breathing was restricted. Digestion slowed. And yes, urination became an Olympic-level challenge. Tightly cinched, a corseted woman might find that she had to hold her bladder for hours, not just because of social pressure, but because her abdomen was physically restricted. The downward pressure on the bladder could be intense. Add in a few glasses of sherry and the need to maintain one's ladylike composure, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Historical medical texts from the time warn of women fainting not from tight laces, but from urinary retention. They simply couldn't relieve themselves quickly or easily enough. Some even suffered from bladder infections and long-term incontinence, though it was rarely spoken of in polite circles. Etiquette books advised women to relieve themselves before arriving at an event and then to avoid doing so until they returned home. The average Victorian ball might last from 9 p.m. until the early morning hours. That's 6 to 10 hours of standing, dancing, and suppressing one's natural needs, all while layered in metal, wool, and modesty. And still women made it work. Sometimes through sheer willpower, sometimes through ingenuity, and sometimes through sheer refusal to acknowledge that their bodies had needs at all. Now picture this, it's midnight. The ball is at its peak. Your corset is squeezing you like a python with opinions. You've had 3 glasses of punch, your crinoline just got caught in a candelabra, and your chamber pot is 2 drawing rooms away with a line. Somehow you keep dancing. Let's now step out of the ballroom and into the home, where you'd expect things to be a little more civilized. Welcome to the chamber pot ballet. If you lived in the Victorian era, especially before the late 19th century, your morning routine probably involved a pitcher of water, a washstand, and a chamber pot tucked discreetly under the bed. Indoor plumbing was a luxury, and for the average household, the bedroom doubled as the bathroom. That chamber pot wasn't just for nighttime emergencies, it was your main toilet. Made of ceramic, metal, or even enamel-coated tin, it had to be emptied, cleaned, and aired out daily. For wealthier homes, servants handled this task. For the less affluent, let's just say a strong stomach was a daily requirement. Now, when it came to women, especially those in elaborate clothing, the act of relieving oneself was not a solo affair. It required planning, positioning, and sometimes choreography. Let's say you're dressed for a visit or tea, wearing your full day dress with layers and bustle. If the urge strikes, you can't just lift and squat like you're camping. Instead, the chamber pot routine became its own little performance. Step 1. Navigate to the pot possibly behind a privacy screen or in a closet-sized retiring room. Step 2. Hike up your skirts a minimum of 3 or 4 layers. Step 3. Steady yourself without falling over, which was no small feat considering how slippery stockings could be on wooden floors. Step 4. Position the pot just right beneath the split drawers. Step 5. Aim, hover, exhale, and pray nobody walks in. Meanwhile, the pot, delicate and floral though it may have been, offered no noise insulation, so everyone nearby knew what was going on even if no one dared acknowledge it. And this routine happened multiple times a day. In some households, furniture was designed to accommodate the process. The commode chair was essentially an armchair with a chamber pot hidden beneath a hinged seat. Some even had padded lids so it could double as regular furniture when not in use. Still, the odor was unavoidable. This brings us to a less glamorous truth. Victorian homes often smelled like pee. Perfumes, potpourri, and smelling salts weren't just frills. They were practical tools in the war against stench. Charcoal and vinegar were common deodorants, and some people stuffed their chamber pots with herbs like rosemary or lavender to mask the smell. But nothing could quite erase the underlying reality. In a world without sewage systems, every home had a lingering bouquet of human waste. And then there were the servants, mostly women tasked with emptying and scrubbing these pots sometimes dozens a day in larger homes. It was physically grueling and emotionally thankless. Their labor kept up the illusion of effortless elegance, but make no mistake, someone was hauling that full ceramic bowl down 3 flights of stairs to dump it outside. That's right, outside. Most chamber pots were emptied into backyard cesspools or thrown into open drains. In cities, it was common to hear the shout of Gardy Lou, a holdover from earlier centuries as waste was flung from upstairs windows into the street below. London, in particular, developed an entire underground night soil industry. Workers who collected human waste at night and carted it off for use as fertilizer. Let that sink in. The same woman who spent the afternoon embroidering by candlelight might have peed in a pot in her drawing room while the streets below filled with runoff from a dozen other homes just like hers. Now what about when she left the house? Welcome to public urination, but make it ladylike. Men had it easy. Public urinals called pissoirs or chalets were dotted across cities like Paris and London. Women, however, were expected to either hold it or go home. That was the rule. But women didn't just stop having bladders the moment they stepped outside. And so once again, necessity birthed invention. One of the most fascinating pieces of forgotten history is the urinette, a portable female urinal shaped like a small canister or elongated bladder. These were made of rubber, tin, or leather and tucked into garters or strapped to the thigh. Some were soft and flexible, others hard and angular. A few came with decorative pouches to hide them inside skirts or cloaks. These weren't widely advertised, of course. They were whispered about, passed down from mother to daughter, purchased in apothecaries under code names like hygienic vessel or lady's flask. One 19th century traveler wrote about a certain rubber contrivance that saved her from scandal during a train delay, but she never gave the brand name. And let's not forget the ultimate indignity, women relieving themselves behind carriages, bushes, alleyways anywhere semi-private. Diaries and letters contain coded references to stepping away for a moment or consulting nature, often accompanied by a note of embarrassment or humor. One letter from 1874 recounts a lady in a full travel skirt who ducked behind a hedge with the speed and dexterity of a rabbit, emerging moments later composed, but flushed. The flush, incidentally, was not from an actual flushing toilet. Those were still rare luxuries. And now we descend into the world of secrets sewn into petticoats. Victorian women, especially those who traveled often or ventured into public for extended hours, had to develop truly ingenious ways of managing their needs discreetly. These weren't just socialites, but shopkeepers, governesses, and ladies of modest means trying to uphold appearances while running errands in a world that offered them no facilities. So what did they do? They sewed secrets into their clothing. Some urinettes were designed not just for one-time use, but to be emptied and reused. One particular style was shaped like a soft leather flask, with a small screw top and a funnel-like opening, often tied to a garter belt or tucked into a slit in the petticoats. Others featured glass interiors, rubber linings, and even little tassels or embroidery to camouflage them as nécessaires or decorative personal items. Travel guides of the time surprisingly included polite suggestions for ladies who journey, offering euphemisms like devices for one's comfort or preventatives against exposure. In some cases, special aprons or cloak-like overskirts were worn to conceal the act of urination entirely. Imagine, if you will, a woman squatting behind a tree. Her cloak flared artfully around her like a bell, relieving herself into a vessel strapped to her own thigh. It was not only physically difficult, it was mentally exhausting. Women lived under a constant pressure to appear delicate and proper, while managing a biological need every few hours. They were expected to laugh politely at tea, curtsy at church, and somehow not have a bladder. Hygiene was, to put it bluntly, hit or miss. While wealthier women might have access to clean cloth wipes, rose water, or even bidet-style basins in private homes, many women had no such luxuries. Rags were cloths were rinsed in shared basins. If you were on the road or far from a proper washroom, you made do with what you had, often nothing at all. It's no wonder that urinary tract infections, rashes, and even prolapsed bladders were silently endured. Yet for all the discomfort, the silence around these challenges was ironclad. It was simply not spoken of. A woman could detail the intricacies of her wardrobe for pages in a diary, but never mention how she handled her most basic need. Until, that is, you reach the diaries of travelers. These are the real gold mines. One American woman visiting England in the 1860s described her horror at discovering there were no toilets for women in public anywhere in the town she was staying. She had to wait nearly 5 hours before being offered a curtained-off corner of a pub cellar, where a wooden seat and a cracked bowl greeted her like a scene from a nightmare. She called it an act of desperation and ingenuity. Another traveler describes the moment she realized she'd need to relieve herself on a long carriage ride with no inn in sight. Her maid produced a small leather vessel from her bag, prepped and ready. The lady, mortified, allowed the coachman to take the long route while she shifted, adjusted her layers, and made it work. Her final remark, the horses did not seem to mind. And now it's time for the final curtain lift. Welcome to the royal revelation, a royal flush. When we talk about extravagant solutions to common problems, no one did it quite like the monarchy. Queen Victoria, yes, the Queen Victoria reportedly had a custom-designed traveling toilet. Now, the exact details are shrouded in discretion and rumor, as you'd expect, but the existence of a private, fold-out commode built into her royal carriage, entirely plausible. In fact, some carriage designs from the 1860s and 1870s include diagrams of small necessity compartments complete with cushions, privacy screens, and porcelain basins with removable lids. If you're picturing a gilded potty on wheels, you're not far off. This was a woman who had 9 children, rode trains across the country, and insisted on maintaining royal decorum through it all. Did she pee like a peasant? Absolutely not. She peed like an empress privately, luxuriously, and likely with embroidered hand towels. But she was far from alone. Elite women across Europe began incorporating these clever private solutions into their carriages, their boudoirs, even their travel trunks. Some trunks featured built-in bidets. Others concealed drawers full of linen cloths, perfume bottles, and collapsible pots. If you had the money, you could essentially carry a secret bathroom wherever you went. And yet, despite the ingenuity, the embarrassment never fully vanished. Now picture this, a carriage bumping down a cobbled London street. Inside, a duchess clenches her jaw, tugs her skirts into place, and disappears behind a velvet curtain inside the cabin. Outside, crowds wave and cheer, oblivious to the royal pee break in progress. The horses trot on, the chambermaid shifts her gaze, and history rolls forward on wheels. And a whisper of ammonia. And so we end not with a bang, but with a very discreet tinkle. Let's take a moment to appreciate the full absurdity of it all. Victorian women lived in a world that demanded they be angelic, untouchable, and absolutely dry at all times, while wearing 15 pounds of fabric and steel on their hips, and pretending they never had to go. They were supposed to faint gracefully, but never from needing the loo. They were encouraged to dance until dawn, but not to disappear behind a screen for 5 minutes. They were taught how to flirt with a fan, but not how to ask, "Excuse me, where's the nearest chamber pot?" Every corset clasp, every crinoline hoop, every layer of embroidered modesty was a physical reminder of how much effort went into denying the body. And yet their bodies refused to be ignored. So they adapted. They crouched in shadows and under stairwells. They wore flasks strapped to their thighs. They trained their bladders like prize fighters. They handed off full chamber pots to maids without a word. They maneuvered behind furniture, within carriages, and into split drawers like contortionists with manners. And still they held their heads high. While men wandered over to a wall and whistled while they watered the cobblestones, women had to choreograph relief as an act of disguise. It was taboo. It was exhausting. It was, let's be honest, unfair and fair. But it was also deeply human. Because for all the silk, the ceremony, and the society rules, Victorian women were real people with real needs. They laughed. They leaked. They made it work. Not in spite of their clothing, but through it. Their fashion wasn't just decorative, it was tactical. And if that's not worthy of admiration, I don't know what is. So the next time you see a portrait of a dainty lady in a gown big enough to hide a piano, don't just marvel at the fashion. Ask yourself, where's the chamber pot? Is there a bordaloo under that bustle? A flask tucked discreetly in her garter? Did she dance the polka with a full bladder and the serenity of a saint? Probably. Victorian fashion was elegant, yes, but it also required planning, physical control, and sometimes a secret porcelain bucket hidden under the chaise lounge. Now we ask you, if you were dropped into the middle of an 1870s garden party with a corset, 4 petticoats, and no toilet in sight, what would you do? Would you hike your skirts and hope for the best, invest in a discreet urinette, or politely faint before anything catastrophic happened? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more stories like this about the hidden, smelly, strange, and all too real parts of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your weirdest, most curious friend. Because next time, we're diving into something even more jaw-dropping, the Edwardian beauty regimen that involved leeches, arsenic pills, and face cream made from nightingale droppings. Yes, really. History's weird. We just make it smellier.